The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads Podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Mijairo Ducano from Gannon Baker Basketball, and you're listening to the Hoopheads Podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering new subscribers 10% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code SAVE10 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its play bank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball.
You just get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, you just got to realize that you're not going to be for everybody, right? And you need to do what you think is right.
Babe Kwasniak will be starting his first season as the Boys Varsity Basketball Coach at Cornerstone Christian Academy in Willoughby Hills, Ohio, in the fall of 2021. Prior to Cornerstone, Kwaz served 10 seasons as the Boys Varsity Basketball Coach at his alma mater, Villa Angela St. Joseph High School in Cleveland, Ohio. Babe was a 3-time state champion as a player at VASJ under his father, the coaching legend Ted Kwasniak. He played Division I basketball at West Point, where the discipline he learned at home served him well during his time in the Army. Upon returning to his alma mater as the boys' varsity coach in 2010, Kwaz led VASJ to 5 straight state championship games, winning it all in 2013, 2015, and 2017. His father, Ted, was his assistant throughout his tenure as the leader of the Viking program. In addition to our usual hoops talk, Kwaz speaks candidly about the realness of PTSD, dealing with suicidal thoughts and actions, and shares the real-life struggles he has gone through over the years. If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Our roster of shows is growing, so don't forget to check out all our other podcasts on the Hoopheads Pod Network, including Thrive with Trevor Huffman, Beyond the Ball, the CoachMaze.com podcast, Players Court, Bleachers and Boards, The Green Light, Courtside Culture, and our team-focused NBA pods, Cavaliers Central, Knuck a Few Buck, 305 Culture, #Lakers, Motor City Hoops, X's and O's NBA Breakdown, Spanning the Spurs, LA Hoops, The Wizards Hoops Analyst, Lakers Fast Break, At the Buzzer, and coming soon, Daily Thunder. We're looking for more NBA podcasters interested in hosting their own shows centered on a particular team. Email us info@hoopheadspod.com if you're interested in learning more and bringing your talent to our network. Take some notes and listen thoughtfully as we talk with Babe Kwasniak, boys basketball head coach at Cornerstone Christian Academy in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel, and tonight we are pleased to welcome back to the Hoopheads podcast. Guest number 2 from way back in August of 2018 when he sat down in person with me, I believe at the Intercontinental Hotel in downtown Cleveland, following Alan Stein, who was guest number 1. I know, hard to believe that at some point we actually interviewed people in person instead of via what is now Cast or Skype or Zoom or whatever it might be. But at any rate, Babe Kwasniak, currently the head coach at Cornerstone Christian in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Babe, welcome back, my man.
Mike, Jason, thanks for having me. Did I just make sure I'm hearing this right? Did I just get introduced as Alan Stein's JV team? Because I have a hard. I mean, I guess it's better than being Greg White's JV team, but hey, man, that seems like 3 lifetimes ago, doesn't it, Mike? It really
sure does. The fact that you could sit down in person and actually do some things seems like it was a long time ago, just because of the pandemic. But it also feels like since we're 440 episodes ago, as we were talking before you jumped on, it's hard to believe that from those humble beginnings that we've been able to kind of get to where we are. And since we last talked, you have also switched positions, which we're going to get into and talk a little bit about that as we move forward in the podcast. But we're going to start out by just having you give our listeners who maybe you can always go back and listen to Babe's first episode and go through and hear some of the stories of his childhood and growing up and with his father, who was a coach long time at Villa Angela St. Joseph High School here in Cleveland, Ohio. But just kind of give us your background real quick for people who are tuning in and maybe didn't listen to that episode. Tell us a little bit about your athletic background and sort of the connection that you had to Villa Angela St. Joseph School growing up.
Well, Mike, before I do that, I just want to tell you, man, just like you said, being the second episode, I'm so proud of what you and Jason have been able to do. And like we talked about, man, who would have ever thought that you'd have 400 plus episodes? And it's really, it's like we grew up as basketball junkies, right? And I know you and I grew up the same way. So for you to be able to do this and do it at the level, I'm so proud of you, and I'm just so just so honored to be a part of it. And just thank you so much, because I don't even know if you can imagine this would take off like it did. And I mean, I just had so many people tell me how much they enjoyed it. And I haven't listened to every episode, but man, I bet you I've listened to over 100 of them. So just great job to you and Jason. Thank you so much for what you guys do for our game. And the fact that you're from Northeast Ohio even makes me prouder. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we appreciate that. We always appreciate the kind words, and it's been a lot of fun. And as much value as hopefully we've provided out there to people who are a part of our audience, I think Jason and I would both say that we've gotten way more value out of it than what we could ever hope to give. And it's just a small way, as you said, growing up with the game of basketball and being in love with it from the time that I could walk, to be able to, in some small way, give something back to the game has been really meaningful for me. And as I told you before we jumped on as well, being able to just connect with great people from all across the country at all different levels of the game and develop friendships with people that I'm going to continue to be in touch with and be friends with for the rest of my life is truly meaningful. And so to hear you say, how proud you are of it, of being a part of it, that means the world to me. So go ahead and just give people an idea. Tell them a little bit about yourself, your basketball, your athletic background, and then we'll jump into some meat and potatoes of what you're doing as a coach.
I grew up as a gym rat. There probably hasn't been a gym in Northeast Ohio that I wasn't at. My dad started coaching first off, he started coaching in CYO, in the 70s. He was a long-standing CYO coach at St. Williams and coached your guy, Pat Vianchik. And then in 82, he got the assistant job with Coach Mike Moran, the legendary St. Joe's and John Carroll coach. So I grew up in a gym. I played at St. Joe's for him. We won 2 state championships. We won 3 while I was there. When I was a freshman, I was on the JV team, and went on then to play at West Point, and we weren't very good, but I played for an incredible coach by the name of Dino Gaudio, who ironically just got let go at Louisville. It's a whole other subject we can spend a whole other podcast on, just where loyalty is gone and all that. And from then I went on to serve in the armed forces, because I was a West Point graduate. I had to do 5 years, and one of the jobs I had was coaching the All Army and All Armed Forces team, and got that gig through a guy named Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, who also coached the Armed Forces team. And so I did that while I was in the service. And once I got out of the service, I was just looking to stay in the game, and coached 2 years at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, in Kansas City, where my wife went to med school. Did a year at St. James Academy in Lenexa, Kansas, worked for a guy named Andy Talicki. It's probably the best job I ever had because he dealt with the parents. He did all the stuff that nobody wants to do. I had all the authority and none of the responsibility, Mike, right? Which I think that's what coaches complain about now, is having all this responsibility and no authority. And then from there, my wife is a dermatologist in Highland Heights, and we moved back to Cleveland. And yeah, the St. Joe job came open, and I took that in May of 2010, and did that for 10 years. And I think we were pretty successful. Went 48-6 in the state tournament, which I think is a pretty good percentage. And we won three state championships. Played on ESPN 3 times. Had 9 guys get full scholarships. Won 7 district championships in a row, which is very, very, very difficult. And then I got let go. And I'm sure we'll go into the story. I never would have left St. Joe's on my own. The athletic director who got rid of me, Elvis Gerback, was an NFL quarterback. He was there for 18 months. And, looking back, it hurt. And I always tell my kids, attitude and effort are the only 2 things you can control. That's an Alan Steinism right there, right? Something that he always talks about. And looking back, I probably didn't control that as well as I should have, right? I was bitter, I was angry. It hurt because it's my home and I love the place. And anytime you get kicked out of your home, and it wasn't like I just coached there for 10 years. I spent my whole childhood there. I spent pretty much my whole entire life there. And, and just the way they got rid of me, they had the police, they treated me like a criminal. They had the police escort me out, and none of that was fun. It wasn't fun for my family. It just wasn't a good look for anybody, both me and my dad. And but looking back on it, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It really was, because like I said, I never would have left on my own, and I'm sure we'll go into this, but God does everything for a reason, Mike. And at the time, I kind of always defined myself through the game of basketball, and now I've kind of learned there's a lot more to this life. And coaching basketball, winning state championships isn't who I am. I'm not even my accomplishments or what anyone else says I am, or what I even think I am. I'm who God says I am. And it's kind of taken a lot of these life lessons to get to that. And this past March, my son went to Cornerstone. My oldest son, BK, is a junior there. Went to Cornerstone for a year, and their coach, Andy Waybrek, just kind of approached me and said, "Hey, man, what do you think of doing this?" And I was kind of taken back by it. We mentioned it, and my dad was an assistant for him this year, and it was kind of an awesome year to be in the stands, Mike, and just be a parent. With COVID, what a great year to not coach, right?
What a great year to miss. That was a good year. If you're gonna miss a year, it was a good one to miss.
It really was. And it just I was able to hit the reset button. And again, this has nothing to do, or very little to do with basketball. They never even asked for my resume. There were some other places that I was looking to go into, and they just didn't have any interest in me. There was one place where my references were General Marty Dempsey, who was the 18th chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. He runs USA Basketball, and Mike Krzyzewski, and I didn't finish in their top 3. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just not meant to coach anymore. Maybe what parents say about me is I have too much discipline and I'm too organized. Like, maybe I'm just not meant to do this anymore. And then this opportunity came up, and it was just kind of too good to pass up. There were a plethora of things. Because people do ask me that, they're like, why? If I could pick anywhere to coach, it would be Cornerstone. It's just a perfect situation for me. It's a place where they're all about glorifying God, and that's where I am in my life, and they're just the caliber of kid that I get to deal with there, and the administration, thus far has been great, and like you talk about all the time on the Hoops Head podcast. I have several mentors, and the 3 of them I can think of off the top of my head are Sean O'Toole, Bob Krzyzewski, and Eric Flannery. And all 3 of them, without hesitation, say their favorite thing was the ability to coach their kids. And now that I'm going to have 2 of my sons, playing for me next year was just something I can't pass up. Now, that's not the only reason I'm doing it, obviously, because that wouldn't be the right reasons to do it. But for every one of those guys who they're like second fathers to me. For those guys to say that, Mike, was just something I can't pass up, and it just seemed like it was kind of God's plan.
Yeah, you only get one go round, and when you talk about being involved in senior kid, I want to talk to you a little bit about what it was like to sit in the stands as a parent as opposed to being a coach. We'll get to that in a second. I want to go back to when you left St. Joe's. What were the conversations like with your dad in that moment, in the heat of the moment, as that was all happening, and you're sitting down, you're having conversations with your father? What were those conversations like? What were you guys talking about?
Well, yeah, that's a great question because, I mean, he coached Elvis, so, and again, I'm not blaming Elvis. I think it was the administration. They obviously didn't like me. It's not worth getting in the weeds over, but I think a big point of contention was, the principal and Elvis, they didn't send their kids to VASJ. And my kid was first in the class. He played 4 sports. So I believed in the place, right? And the biggest thing you could do to show you believe in the place is send your kids there. And, that was something, and a lot of times I was probably too dogmatic with how I voiced my opinion. Like, yeah, this place is, good enough for my kid, but it wasn't good enough for your kids. And the principal sends his kid the holy name. I mean, my goodness, so, to answer your question, my dad was hurt. He was really hurt. Elvis never met with me. He fired me over the phone, but my dad did meet with him. And the first thing he told my dad was like, why do you do this? What joy do you get out of this? And, my dad's been doing this for, 60 years. And, he was hurt. He was really hurt. But at one point when I knew, because we were going to keep BK there, the guy who got the job, Ashton Ward, worked for me. But, nobody ever called us. Nobody ever, asked if he should stay. And we were saying, hey, BK, if you want to stay here, this is your school. This isn't their school. You play 4 sports, you're first in the class. But looking back, Mike, it was probably the best thing. That it was absolutely the best thing we ever did. And my dad, basically, when my dad said, yeah, maybe it's time to go, I was like, whoa, because I know he does. He just loves the place. I mean, my goodness, he's won 7 state championships at that school. And, that's a whole other conversation we can get in. The fact that he's not in the Hall of Fame, Ohio Hall of Fame,
absolutely.
It's a joke.
It's crazy.
It's almost like, like Huggins not getting in with 900 wins. And this is Coach Huggins' quote, not mine. He said, if your dad's not in that Hall of Fame, they might as well not have one in Ohio. That's a quote from him. And, for him to say, yeah, maybe it's just time to move on. Sometimes, when you're going through this pain, you just don't see your purpose or you don't see God's plan. And obviously I didn't see it. I think there were a lot of other people who loved me who did see it. And it all worked out the way it was supposed to.
So sitting in the stands this year, what's that like for you? Were you more relaxed, less relaxed? Were you feeling like, I can't have an impact on the outcome the way I did as a coach? What was your attitude? What were you like? What was your demeanor like sitting in the stands? How would you describe that experience?
No, I mean, my wife hated it because I'm a control freak. I know who I am. I know who I'm not. So, and let me say that too, Mike. I mean, think about Andy Waybrick. So here's a guy, and he's going to be my associate head coach. How many guys in the Cleveland area, and you've interviewed a lot of them, how many guys would do what this young man did, right? He basically said, listen, I know what's best for my school, and I know what's best for this program. So he says, I want you to be the head coach. It's pretty incredible, dude. Now, I can tell you, my ego, that was partially why, I didn't want to be an assistant. I knew I needed a time off, and it was awesome when he hired my dad. But, so now I'm in the stands and I'm that, and I try not to be that parent. But on the other end too, it's just, who I am. Obviously you're listen, we didn't win those games by accident. Although a lot of people I think probably think we did. We didn't fall to the mountaintop. We didn't go 48-6 in the state tournament on accident. And so of course, my wife would have to get their distance, but again, it was great in the COVID, in the COVID era because there's just not a lot of people there, and you kind of just go sit up in the corner. And my oldest son is basketball is probably his 4th. I won't say it's 4th best sport. It's just, I guess, 4th favorite sport. He's a golfer and he's a really good runner. And now my middle one Cummins a lot more. My oldest is a lot more like his mother, and my middle one's a lot more like me. He's a gym rat, and he just thinks basketball. School gets in the way of basketball. So it's going to be neat to kind of have both of them together. But yeah, it was great. And it just gives you a whole new perspective. When parents yell at the coach, when parents yell at the refs, listen, when parents yell at kids, like, no one's trying to screw up, right? Everybody's out there doing the best. And it just makes you think, Mike and Jason, like, nobody goes into this to screw kids. So when you're sitting there with listening to some of these parents, it's like, you should be embarrassed. Like, you're yelling and stuff. Like, you think, and I'll use Andy Weber for example because he's a Cornerstone Christian coach, but you think, like, he's taking this job because, I want to screw kids. Like, listen, nobody's getting rich off this stuff. And, they're doing this because they either love the game or they love their school. And in Andy Weber's case, they love both. And I'm sure that's why it hurt so much with me being let go from Joe's, because I always said I don't know if I love coaching as much as I love the kids I got to coach. And I think I said that on your first podcast.
Yes, you did.
And it's just you got to understand, where the other person's coming from. And now that I've been able to kind of work for the Pentagon and go through this whole political climate, it's like I've never had the appreciation, Mike, for you can't tell somebody how to feel, right? Because they feel that way for a reason. So it's easy for somebody to tell me, hey, let it go. Well, you don't know, like, our school was on the cusp of closing in 2010, and we had 235 kids there. Now we got plus 500 kids. You don't know what we went through. So, and you don't know that I grew up there. So for you to say, let it go, well, you don't really know, kind of what I've been through. And, now that it's kind of, it just kind of gives you perspective as you get older and you get wiser and you realize kind of what's important in life.
So when you're sitting out that year, does it become clear to you as you're sitting in the stands that you're like, hey, I can't keep sitting in the stands. Like, I got to get back into it. Was that clear to you?
No. As a matter of fact, it probably was the opposite. It was like the more I was away from it. When I first originally got let go, it was like, no, I'm going to coach again. I'm going to show you. And I think that probably came from just a mentality that I had my entire life. Like, my guidance counselor told me in high school, don't even apply to West Point. You have no chance of getting in. Okay, screw you. I'm going to show you. And my whole life was, because I was a 5'11" white guy, I was just proving people wrong. And, now I've got to a point where I want to prove to people who love me right? I've always said that. Besides my dad telling me that he loves me every day, the number one thing he's always believed in me, right? And so you kind of want to prove those people right. To answer your question, no, I'm like, the more I was away from it, I thought, all right, okay, I had other things I was doing in life, and in August of 2019, I was sworn in as a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army in Ohio. At 43, I was the youngest person in the United States of America, to ever do that.
Tell people what that is.
Yeah. So basically I have two jobs, Michael. One is to recruit for the Army. And I've had 7 guys that have played for me that have gone on to serve in the armed forces. So it's to go into high schools and colleges and basically say, hey, here's why you should serve in the Army. Basically be the conduit between the civilian sector and the Army. And then the second part is the Soldier for Life program, which is, kind of like once a soldier, always a soldier, and, kind of taking care of our own. And, that probably gets to the next point. In 2015, I was, we won our second state championship, and, it's kind of a long drawn out story, but I'll tell it because I think it'll be good, for your listeners I tried to take my own life. I was, you heard that right. I tried to kill myself. I just got suspended from VASJ just for a kind of a blow up with the administration, and trying to make a long story short, I took a bunch of pills and I tried to drive off a cliff. Like I said, I'm a control freak. I often think, like, was I hallucinating? Like, kind of what was going on? And the next week, I was going out to Chicago to go see my kid Derek Pardon play at Northwestern. And the kid who made the layup to beat Michigan, and the kid who got Northwestern their first ever tournament game to the NCAA tournament. And when I went out there, I befriended Doug Collins. Yeah, that Doug Collins. At a Steph Curry camp one year. We kind of hit it off. His son-in-law, Paul Romanza, coached at a school that we played. He played at Penn. His daughter, Kelly, played at Lehigh against my wife Laura at Army. His son, obviously Chris, and I worked Duke camp for years and years together. So when I went to Chicago, I stayed with him. So this is a week after I tried to take my own life. Mike, I'm sitting in his living room, and Ohio State played Northwestern at Northwestern. I'm sitting there at like midnight eating a cheeseburger in Doug Collins' living room that he made from like Walmart or Costco. It was a good cheeseburger too, I got to tell you. And we're sitting there and we're just talking just about everything. And I'll never forget this. He said, he called me captain because of the Army. He said, Cap, you think you're going to find happiness in winning basketball games? And I'll never forget that. He said, you think you're going to find happiness in winning, basketball games with 16 and 17-year-old kids? And then, I remember that, and I remember him. I mean, here's a guy who made the 2 free throws versus Russia, was number 1 pick in the NBA draft. There's another guy that's a joke. He's not in the Hall of Fame, and just done so much for basketball, and arguably one of the greatest names in the history of our game. And
those are the 2 greatest free throws in the history of basketball. It's not even close.
Correct.
It's not even close.
And Mike, he put his finger right in my chest, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Cap, you're screwed up." And he used another word. It began with an F, and it's not funny. He said, "You are screwed up." And I got to tell you, the next week, hey, like I told you, I never failed at anything in my life, man. And when people told me I couldn't do something, I was going to prove them wrong. So, I failed the week before and taken my own life. So I was gonna try again. I mean, I had it all planned out how I was going to do it. And that's for details for a later podcast. But yeah, after that, I went and got help. And, now I get to kind of go around the country and do keynotes, and that's my story. And listen, the invisible enemy is real, and nobody, and I mean nobody, beats the invisible enemy alone. Nobody. At the time, and when I went and finally got help, a lot of it was for PTSD, and folks said, "Oh, it's for what you went through over there." No, I never even deployed. So a lot of people have this misconception that, PTSD is from killing people or watching someone be killed. I was suffering from guilt. I was suffering from, the fact that like I should be over there, and I was coaching high school basketball, and it was eating me up inside. And I had people that were close to me that would say like, you won't do it. And I mean, it was some messed up stuff. And kind of to fast forward that, Mike, a couple of years later, and so I'm like an abused child. I'm not talking about it. I'm not bringing it up. In 2017, we won another state championship. So we won our 3rd. And I remember, Mike, after that thinking, like, you know what? That part of my life, that's a chapter in my book that's gone. I'm never going to talk about that again, right? Like that's in the past. I'm moving forward. Like my book could have ended that chapter, but it didn't. And here I am, and everything is going to be okay. And this will be near and dear to your heart. I was actually speaking at Lake Erie College to their entire athletic department, and their captain of their volleyball team comes up to me and she says, "Coach, that was awesome. Would you mind working with us?" And at the time, I'm talking about, we're just talking leadership. And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And of course, I'm coaching at St. Joe's, so it was tough to find the time, but we would keep in touch from time to time. Couple months later, I get an email. Let me rewind. There was this gal on their team who was struggling with her mental health. Now, granted, I've not said anything about what I went through, but she just said, this one girl's really struggling, and you've really picked her up. I've never seen her, so the pep in her step when they recruited her, like she's like a new person. I'm like, well, that's awesome. I'm going to work with y'all some more. In September of that year, I'm sorry, I get emotional but she emails me, the captain of the team, and she says, and I'll say her name, Mo Briggs, because I love her. Mo, if you're listening, you're the best. And she said, she said this young lady took her own life. And I came home that night. I walked in my wife's room. I walked in our room, and I said, "I'll never not tell my story again." And she said, "Well, you can't save everybody." I go, I know, but if I can save one person, isn't it worth it? And when I save one person, I'm going to go save somebody else. If one person can learn from my story, that's going to help more people. And people, and I get asked all the time, like, what was it? And yes, I had to get on medication, and that helped. And I had to get therapy, and I still do, Mike, and that helps. But if my wife didn't love me when I probably didn't deserve to be loved anymore, I wouldn't be here. And like I said, nobody beats the invisible enemy alone. The guy that I work for that's probably like my second father is a guy by the name of General Robert Brooks Brown. If you ask Coach K, he'll tell you he's one of the best players I ever played for him, Duke or Army. And the day after I got sworn in at the Pentagon, I went and had a beer with him. And I sat down, and I remember I told him I went through some stuff, and he got all emotional. He's like, I wasn't there for you. And I'm thinking to myself, sir, you fought in 2 wars. Like, or you led us in 2 wars. Like, what do you mean you weren't there for me? But I never told him, like, because I was ashamed. I was, so then in June of 2020, once I got let go and COVID hits, and you start reevaluating everything, right? You start reevaluating like everything, like what's important to you and what's the meaning of life. And right, this is for a lot of people, this has been the worst year of life. In a lot of ways, COVID was the best year of my life. And one of the things that happened was David Nurse, who's the nephew of the Coach Nurse for the Raptors, who played for me at UMKC. He had the One Percenter podcast, and he had me on there, and I told my story. And I don't know if you ever listened to it. I mean, it went viral, and it hit pretty hard. And I go back to General Brown, because I said, hey, sir, listen to this podcast. I said, just, when you get a chance, just listen to it. And I don't know, I felt like a coward, Mike, that I didn't tell him. And I'm sitting, I don't know. The guy was getting ready to retire after 38 years. He invited me to his, to his retirement. I was sitting with, because of my position in the military, I was sitting with 3-star generals, which, dude, I was a captain. I'm like looking around, and all these guys that play for Coach K are looking at me like I got 3 heads. Like, what are you even doing here? And it's not like I knew. And so he called me, and we both cried, and it was super emotional. And he just said something I'll never forget. He said, "Listen, of all the guys that have ever worked for me, and there's been hundreds of thousands that have worked for him," he said, "You're the last guy I ever thought would ever go through, this. And you need to understand that you're going to save lives, and you telling your story is going to save lives." And just hearing that from him just was life changing for me, because I mean he's been my mentor my entire life, and at least my military life, and he always wanted to be a coach, and he ends up becoming a 4-star general. And it was just so incredible just to kind of hear that from him. And so now I'm kind of partnering with him, and we're doing our best. We have 25 soldiers a day taking their own lives. And listen, Mike, there's so many parallels between the coach, not only the high school coach, but the coach and somebody who serves in our armed forces, right? And listen, a lot of my shame was, it wasn't just it wasn't just military related. It was, it was not being a good enough father, not being a good enough husband, just not being good enough. So here I was, accomplished all these things, and I was never maybe good enough in my own mind. And and then to kind of fast forward to this past September, DeWine brought his whole office out because of COVID, and they came and sat on my porch, and they put me in the Veterans Hall of Fame. And this is, so now I'm in the Hall of Fame with Ulysses S. Grant, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, and Woody Hayes. And folks say all the time, hey, you got a raw deal at St. Joe's. Yeah, maybe, but I don't know if I deserve to be in the Hall of Fame with Ulysses S. Grant either. So, things work out the way they're supposed to. I mean, sometimes through all your pain, you just don't see God's plan. You don't see his purpose. But my clarity has never been better than it is right now, Michael. It's never been as good as it is right now. And, and I'm not the guy on the street corner, Mike, reading Bible verses. That's not me. But, I could tell you, I was saved, and I was saved for a reason. I literally shouldn't be here. And, and I still struggle with it. And folks ask, do you still have suicide thoughts? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. But I know better now, and I know how much it would hurt my family, and I know how much it would hurt the people who love me. And now I know, just like it's hard for me to be completely mad at that experience, because if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't be able to help other people. And so now I just have, like I said, just an unfound clarity that I never had before. Added to that, all the stuff we went through. My wife battled 2 bouts of breast cancer, and so I'm sitting on that porch, watching Dwayne put me in this Hall of Fame that I probably have no business being in. Another shout out to my dad not being in the Ohio High School Basketball Hall of Fame with 7 state championships. And I think to myself, you know what? None of this matters, Mike. None of it matters. The games I've won, the ESPN, like this position with the Pentagon, being in this Hall of Fame, all that really matters are these people on my porch. That's all that matters. And so I think about, okay, what does the term coach mean? Well, it's father, right? So what type of coach should I be? I should be that type of coach that I would want my sons to play for. And, I think of the people that have had the impact on me, and just every person that has had that impact on me has been a coach. Maybe they're disguised as a military officer like General Brown, but make no mistake about it, every one of those people in my life, you may use the word mentor, you may use the word big brother. To me, the name coach is something I will never, ever take for granted because it literally saved my life. This is kind of a quick story going back to Coach Collins. When The Last Dance came out, I wrote him, and after watching that, I get real emotional, and I said, Coach, I'm so proud of you for all that, but you know what? I know you coached Michael Jordan, but for me, the best thing you ever did was you saved my life. And then this last go around with the Hall of Fame, he didn't get in. And my goodness, he's got to go in. Coach Huggins has got to go in eventually. But I said, hey, Coach, again, man, I'll never stop telling you that you saved my life. And it just goes to show, like, as coaches, right, Mike, we're always looking to see something in somebody they don't see in themselves. Well, like that day, if Coach Collins told me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to hear, I might not even be here. Right, and my wife and my kids would be without me, and you got to be pretty sick in the head to think that like those people are better off without you, and that's how sick I was, and there's no way I was getting out of that alone. So I beg anyone listening, I mean anybody, if you even think you need help, just go. I mean, even when I was first going through it, the doctor's like, okay. And I understand, my wife's a physician, right? She was first in her class in med school, and we would have arguments because I lost 45 pounds, and I'm like, this pain is in my chest, and this is not in my head. And it caused a lot of stress in our marriage. And I remember when I finally went and got help, this doctor says, he goes, let me ask you something. When you have these chest pains, is it when you're coaching? No, sir. Is it, you're a keynote speaker? Is it when you're speaking? No. Coach on ESPN? No. He's like, I bet you're laying in bed. I said, that's it. I'm laying in bed, and I feel like I'm literally going to die. And, so after 15 trips to the ER or whatever it was finally like, okay, I'll go get this aspect of it checked out. And now after I do, it just gives you so much peace of mind. So many people see that vulnerability as a weakness, and I absolutely see it as a strength, right? It's just hard to get to me now, where it was pretty easy before, because like after having been through that, it's kind of hard to even mention anything as coaching as being hard, Mike and Jason. It's that's fighting cancer is hard. Fighting what I did is hard, and again, nobody beats it alone. You have to get help. Losing a basketball game it's a challenge, right? Going through West Point is a challenge. So when you view it that way, like your whole life changes. Along with the fact that I just realized that what, I'm not ashamed anymore of trying to commit suicide, because I firmly believe that God put me in that position because He wants me to help people. And if He didn't put me there, I wouldn't be here right now talking to you guys.
Hey, hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com/team pricing to learn more. That's ARYSE.com. Before I ask a question, I want to offer up 2 statements. Number 1, I'm sure people have said this to you before. I'm not sure if I've said it to you before, but just thank you for your service to the country, both through your experiences at West Point when you were actively in the military and what you continue to do as a civilian. Number two, thank you for sharing your story, and not just with us here on the podcast, but obviously with the audience. And that goes to, I guess, my question after listening to you tell that story is, you were obviously in a place where you weren't healthy, and yet somehow, some way, a guy who has had the success that you had, both as an athlete, as a student, as an officer in the military, as a coach, you've had success everywhere you've gone, and now you're facing an opponent, your mental health, that you couldn't beat alone. And Coach Collins kind of pushed you towards, hey, you need to get this thing straightened out. You need to figure it out. How did you initially, because if you go back to that time, even 5 years ago, there was probably a lot bigger, maybe stigma is the wrong word, but it just wasn't as out in the open. Obviously, in the last couple of years, many more people have come forward in the world of athletics and said, hey, I'm suffering from this mental health problem. And in a lot of ways, you go back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and that was looked at, as you said, as a sign of weakness. Nobody wanted to admit to that. So how did you, in the moment, when you were alone with your thoughts, how did you find the strength to be able to go and get the help that you needed? What reserves did you call on? Do you remember what the thought process was? How did you go about just getting the strength to be able to go and say, I can't do this by myself. I need help?
Yeah, I prayed. I mean, we have a saying in the Army that there's no atheist in a foxhole. I find that to be very, very true. One of my favorite stories is a chaplain we had who served in the 82nd Airborne Division. He always used to say, every time a soldier would turn to him and say, Chaplain, as they're getting ready to jump out of the airplane, Chaplain, I don't believe in God. He would say, it doesn't matter, son, he believes in you, and you would kick him out of the airplane. And I feel the same way about my faith, and that's pretty awesome that I'm now at Cornerstone, a place where, where everything we do glorifies God, Mike. Listen, I use the hashtag winners win, and I think a lot of people take that the wrong way. They think I'm talking about the scoreboard, and I'm not. When you start comparing yourself to other people, two things happen. Either you think you're inferior to people, or you think you're superior to people, and neither of those glorify God. So when I use the hashtag winners win on all my social media, I'm talking about being the best version of yourself. And if you think about it, the only way in this life that you can not be the best version of yourself is if you quit. And essentially, I tried to quit on life, brother. Like, I tried to check out. And listen, as coaches, we always talk about, right, the process. Like you were talking about to me before, and you're dead right. You're talking about the relationships you made doing all these podcasts. Now, I can sit here and I can tell you about West Point, how it's the greatest laboratory of leadership in the world. It's the number one, leadership institution and education in the world. I don't remember the games in the classes as much as I remember the person to my left and my right. That's all that really truly matters to me, are the people to my left, are the relationships. So, when you're talking about, when I'm talking about winners win, I'm talking about, are you being the absolute best you can be? And as coaches, we always talk about the process, right? We talk about, okay, if you love the process, the results will take care of themselves, which is what I always do with coaching. If we try to win every possession, we're probably going to win the game, right? And I teach my sons that. Listen, I was on stage every year in business in my 7 years, and I ended up culminating managing a $38 million book of business. I worked here in the Pentagon. I won 5 state championships. If you try to be the best you possibly can be, it's kind of hard to fail. Suicide's the only thing where, if you think about it, Mike, the process doesn't matter. You know what it does is the result. Because I'm still here, brother. I'm still here. Amen. I'm still standing right here. So, like, in that case, it's like, okay, the end result right now is I can't go back and do anything about that. All I can do now is say, okay, that wasn't the end of my book. And yes, I tried to take my own life, and I probably deserve that to be the end of my life, but by God's grace, I'm still here. So now I have to do something with that. right? And it's just so important, especially for us coaches as young people, is to understand no matter how down you get on folks and no matter what you think, it's not, this is a chapter in their book, right? And I think so many times as coaches, we think like, oh, this kid's a cancer. If we get rid of him, that's going to be, that's the easy thing to do, Michael. That's the easy way out. Like our job as leaders is to find a way to make it work. Not for us, not for our team, but for them. Because we might be their last chance. We might be their last hope. And I've had so many kids figure it out, later in life. So, the long roundabout way to answer your question, number one is, I prayed. And number two would definitely be my wife. If she wasn't, and I'm sorry I get so emotional talking about her, but if she didn't, tell me she loved me every day to a point where, at some point, like I probably didn't deserve her love, then I wouldn't be here. And I think that's another great lesson is if you love somebody, you probably shouldn't go a day without telling them that. And listen, man, and what I do now, like it's hard, Mike. I mean, it's tough. Like I'm talking about like 12, 14-year-old kids. Like these thoughts never crossed my mind when I was that age. Everyone talks about, get off my grass and how our world was. And Mike, I know you and I talked about that last time about growing up at Epsom Playground and learning to play. These kids, it's a messed up, nasty world they're growing up in, man. Like everything's on film and, the bullying and
social media. It's crazy.
It's nasty. It's nasty. And nobody gets on there and says, hey, man, it's everybody's highlights. Nobody gets on there and says, I just lost my job. I just got fired. My wife left me, and I think I'm thinking about killing myself. Right? Very rarely do people do that. And we have 25 veterans a day taking their own lives. I mean, veterans are 50% more likely to commit suicide. And listen, it's a problem, it's an epidemic throughout the whole country. Like we have kids. I'm dealing with. I mean, I can even tell you like a day I go through. And listen, I love doing it, but it's exhausting. And so what can we do as society? Like just tell people we love them, man. Like and even as coaches, just understand that we're in a profession where you're not really going to realize the impact until 10, 15 years from now. I mean, right? And I know you've told me about about guys like Robbie Williams, right? Like you don't realize until what kind of human beings they end up like. And it's hard. The rest of society is instant gratification, microwave. Okay, I'm going to transfer here. I'm going to put this highlight here. I'm going to get mine now or I'm out of here. Like, where the reality is we're still affecting and impacting more lives. And I guess that's why I'm talking to you right now, because I know the best place where I can impact lives are here. I think the difference is before I probably viewed myself as a coach, and probably a good one, where now I really don't care what people think of me as a coach. It really doesn't matter to me. I really don't let them define my success anymore. I know where I've been, and I now know like what success looked like, and I also know what my hashtag winners win means, and it's got very little to do with what's on that scoreboard.
All right, so let's transition from that piece of your story and let's get into Cornerstone. When you get the job, and it's a little bit of a unique situation in a lot of ways, one, which we've already talked about, that you basically grew up with Villa Angela St. Joseph's, and that was the culture and the environment that you knew and were comfortable with. So now you come into a completely new environment. But not only that, but you're the head coach, and he becomes your assistant coach. And so when you sit down and you're in the interview process and you're in that first meeting, you're talking through that with him, what does that process look like? Because obviously, again, you're two different coaches. You have a way of doing things that you've had success with in the past. So how do you sort of bridge that gap, bring him in where you're both on board, you're both on the same page, you're not stepping on his toes, and just what was the plan from day one when you first get the job? What does that look like?
Well, first off, you say interview, and I talked to other places, you know what I'm saying? Like, right. I mean, I lived in Highland Heights. I talked to Mayfield. I didn't even get an interview. I go to West Jaws and I don't finish in their top three. You start saying like, okay, am I not meant to do this anymore? Like, do I have this reputation So that was the thing over there is I went and met with their, when BK went over there, I went and met with their admissions director, a gal by the name of Kate Baxter, and just a sweetheart, just an absolute doll. And I, at that point, Mike, I didn't even think, we were moving out to Chesterland, so we kind of assumed our kids would go to West Geauga, and like, okay, we're just going to, kind of move on here, like pivot and redirect. And I remember I was telling her, she asked my story, and nothing against Kate, and Kate, if you're listening, I'm sure she won't take offense to this, but like, she didn't care about basketball at all. I don't think she cared about sports at all. She knew she was getting top of the line kid, and she basically asked me for my story, and the thing she clung on to was me talking about my wife having cancer, and at the time I was 43 years old, and I'll never forget this. She goes, "Can I pray with you?" Now, Mike, I'm Catholic. I've grown up in the Catholic Church my whole entire life, St. William's and VASJ. My dad still goes to church every morning, and this is the first time anybody's ever asked to pray with me. Now, people have prayed for me, and especially said they're going to pray for my wife, and some you believe, and in retrospect, some you look back and like, did you really pray for her? I don't know. But like that was crazy to me. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I think I want my kid in this environment. Now, Andy, when we got let go, Andy's cousin Jason Waybreck is my very best friend. I'd say best friend. He's my brother, and you have connections to him.
Absolutely.
He grew up at Upson Playground, and we both played for Pat V and Mark Chacon. Growing up at St. Williams, and he's kind of and Andy was just absolutely livid. He's like, this is, and you got a place here, and I was I just don't know. And so after that interview with the admissions director, it was like, okay, like this place is like, maybe this is, at least it's the right place for my son, and that's a start. So then, as you kind of meet the folks, and I'm not just saying this, Mrs. Adamo, the athletic director, they never asked for my resume. Same thing with Mrs. Ortiz. And now you could say, oh, why would they? Well, these other places, like, some of them might even get in their top three. So like, and I'm not saying this, to self-gratify or whatever. Mike, here's the reality is, and I'll ask you this question: what did winning games do for my high school coaching career? So, like, a lot of reasons on my course, like, nobody else really wanted me, right? Like, and I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm not saying that to be self-deprecating. It's just a fact. Like, so I ended up here, because, and I feel like, a lot was the same with Jesus. Did not hang out with the righteous. He hung out with the broken. He hung out with people like me. He hung out with lepers and prostitutes, and he hung out with the broken. Which we're all sinners, and we're all broken, whether we want to admit it or not. And we're all sinners, and we all need a savior. And so it just kind of like stemmed from that. Like, I know this is a basketball podcast, and you don't want me sitting on my pulpit here, but it had nothing to do with basketball. It really, there was not one basketball related question. Now with Andy, it's kind of like, he worked for Dan Sell, who he absolutely loved, who is somebody I just love and respect. And Dan Sell was another guy that I called and said, hey, this is kind of what's going on. And, and let me talk about that, because, those guys won a state championship in 2016. Then in 2018, they lose to, I think it was Marion Local, right?
Yep, I believe so.
And if you think they were loaded, Michael Bottolo is probably going to be a pro in some facet. And I'll never forget, the first time I ever met Dan Sell was in like 2013, and they were in our district at Garfield. And I came to exchange films with him, and he asked me to talk to his team. And I was like blown away. I'm like, you want me to talk to your team? Like, dude, you're in my district. and he was such a Christian, like, it almost came out fake. I'm like, this is a facade. Like, this guy can't really be this nice, like, he just can't be this, I don't know. Whatever you want to, like, you hear the term Jesus freak or whatever, this can't be real. And now that I know him, it's just absolutely genuine. And when they lost 2018, and we talked about the podcast before, people think winning's an accident and they think it's easy. And he had a loaded team, and they lost. And they were the heavy favorite, but I remember him going in the locker room and shaking hands with the other team. And I just thought that was so classy. And it was like, okay. And I don't think people understand, my story. I mean, my goodness, it was, Jay Billis retweeted it, and it was on, it got 17,000 views or whatever. But like what that guy did for Cornerstone, like St. Joe's, with or without Babe Kwasniak, it's, you know, I mean, my goodness, it's a storied tradition. But what that guy did for, you know, for Cornerstone and everything. So if it weren't for him saying, you know, this is a great place, you know, my kids went here. And it was the same thing the AD did. She's like, listen, all my kids went here. So it was like they knew kind of what I went through, like at St. Joe's. It was like, okay, they want me to send my kids here, but the administrators won't send their own kids here. And listen, that's the one thing I learned at West Point is the oldest and truest form of leadership is leading by example, right? So, okay, this place is, you know, you can work here, you can get paid to go here, which, by the way, I never took $1 from VASJ in 10 years, but no, it's not good enough for my kid. And I just didn't agree with that. So, you know, Andy, I think he loved working for Dan Sell, and he's like, listen, like, I know I'm an assistant coach, and that's what I want to do. And I've had 2 workouts already, and he's been at both of them, 2 open gyms. He's been at both of them, and like he's fired up. And, you know, he's getting married, and he's got you know, some other stuff. So it's like he's going through a transition, and it seemed like an easy, you know, just an easy transition. And just like me, Mike, I think that's why I didn't help him this year, because it's like, dude, I don't want to be that guy. You know, I know I cast a big shadow. You know, and I don't want to be that guy, you know, casting that shadow. You know, and even going back. And I didn't mention this, and I probably should have. So I jumped on with Pat Langdon and Terry Heil. And, brother, I got to tell you, so, you know, my first game was St. Ed's and Lutheran East. I got to tell you, I could see I still want to work with those guys. I had a blast, Mike. I had an absolute blast doing those games on you know, color commentary. Terry Heil should be doing this for the Cavs. He's so good. If you ever had a chance to watch any of those games, those guys at Talkback Fans podcast, man, they're the hoops head. You know, like they just do an incredible job for high school sports. And those guys grabbed me, and I was doing games with them, and I was having a blast. So this wasn't even like something I was seeking out. It just kind of found me.
So what do you do? How do you go about putting your stamp on what it is that Cornerstone Christian Basketball is going to be about? Lay out the plan. What's the plan as you move forward?
Yeah, I've always believed in, you know, if you do these 3 things, you're going to be successful. If you teach kids, number 1, how to be coachable. You know, number 2, how to be a great teammate. And I've seen it. I watched the game from afar this year, and I studied it, and I was just watching so much, you know, just so much garbage. And you think everyone talks about, oh, when your best player is your hardest worker, you're going to be in good shape. I'll tell you this: when your best player is your best teammate, I coached 3 state championship teams. In every one of those cases, that rang true. My best player was my best teammate, and he was definitely my best leader. And that transitions in the third part, and that's something I like to take pride in is you know, be coachable. Number 1, you know, discipline's a form of love. Learn how to be coachable. Number 2 is learn how to become a great teammate, and that leads into becoming a leader. You know, everything I have in my life, everything I've accomplished was because, you know, things I learned from West Point and from my dad and from, you know, growing up is leadership. And that's what separates, I think, the good from the great. And, you know, you hear all the time, if the coach is your best leader, then you're probably in trouble. And I look back and the best teams I had, and they weren't necessarily state championship teams. My favorite team I ever coached lost in the state championship in 2016. It was incredible. Like, we had no business being there. We were the best version of ourselves, and we got a lot out of a little. You know, and then you're watching, again, doing the Talkback Fans podcast, you're watching a lot of these teams that got a little out of a lot, Mike. You know, it's like, man, like, so, you know, and you know what? If you teach kids those 3 things, that applies to the rest of their life, doesn't it, Michael? Like it
sure does.
It applies to the rest of their life. Like, you know, like you're gonna have a boss you don't like. You're gonna have to learn. And even from my own examples, like I wasn't perfect. There were things at VASJ that I probably wish I would have did different. I know this now that I'm with the administration at Cornerstone Christian. I'm going to learn from my past mistakes, and I'll definitely do things different. I'll always stick to my core values, and I'll always do what's right. Even if I'll always say an administrator shouldn't be intoxicated in front of kids, even if that costs me my job. I'll always say, what I feel. I'll never stop doing what I think is right. It's one of my favorite things Thad Mata told me. He said, don't you ever there was one time where I kind of got into a little bit of a verbal altercation with Coach Mata, at least as much as you could get into. And he said, Captain Quaz, don't you ever stop doing what you think is right. And that always stayed with me. And so, yeah, I think we'll try to build leaders. And, you know, along the way, hopefully we'll win a couple games. And I think probably in my past, that was everything to me. It's just not as important now. I think it's more important to, you know, I don't think God cares how many basketball games you win, but I think he does care on your attitude and your effort. I think he cares that you glorify him in everything you do. I think he cares that you always do your best no matter what, that if you're going to do something, you better try to be the absolute best at it. And if you kind of do that, the rest of it takes care of itself.
Hey coaches, parents, and group leaders. I want to introduce you to our newest sponsor, SnapRaise. SnapRaise is the nation's largest digital donation platform built to help teams, youth groups, and clubs raise money quickly and efficiently without selling products. SnapRaise builds your group a customizable campaign website, and students use their mobile devices to connect and engage with their biggest fans. My son's high school team used SnapRaise this season, and our team raised all the money they needed to fund their season, and then some. Getting SnapRaise started is quick and free. Just visit snapraise.com and you'll get connected to a local SnapRaise expert in no time. What does developing leaders look like as a basketball coach? So how do you take that sort of abstract concept of, I want to teach kids to be better leaders? What does that look like day to day, whether that's you seeing kids off the practice floor, whether that's in the film room, whether that's on game night? How do you develop leaders? Give a coach who's out there who might be listening and says, boy, I'd like to be able to develop my players into leaders. How do they go about doing that? What are some things that they could do, or some things that you've done in the past successfully to turn kids into leaders?
Well, I'll give them a simple thing. And what's the number one thing we're fighting, right, Mike? And I'm sure you and Jason talk about this all the time with all your high school coaches. What's the number one thing we're fighting? Entitlement. Hashtag entitlement, right? That's the number one thing we're fighting with today's youth and with today's society. I'm sure I have plenty of it in me. And the only way you fight that is by gratitude. If you're grateful for what you do have, it's hard to be entitled for what you don't have. So I look back on my own life and I look at I look back at what's my biggest accomplishment. Well, I think the highest form of selfless service is serving your country. So the fact that I've had 7 guys serve, that's a pretty high form of gratitude. And I would challenge coaches, like, sometimes just an easy exercise, like, hey, what are you grateful for today? And if you get your kids in that mindset of what you're grateful for, if you're grateful for what you do have, it's hard to be entitled for what you don't have. Right? How many of these kids have you got them just to think about, you know what, man, like, think about your parents driving you to practice every day. Think about, like, we're at a private school. Somebody's making sacrifices to send you here. Have you thanked them? Have you thought about saying, hey, mom and dad, thank you? A couple of years back, I was working for Coach Fischel at Steph Curry's select camp with the top 20 players in the country, and we were going around the room. The NBA was doing this, I don't know, the census session or whatever, and you had to go around and, like, what's your biggest accomplishment? And I was with Taj Holden, and like, Steph was like, won 2 world championships, like, and I'm like, next, Mike, like, what do I still have? And I remember, I completely choked. I said, we just went to 5 straight state championship games. Nobody in Ohio has ever done that, to include LeBron Ramon James, his school, St. Vincent St. Mary. And like, afterwards, I'm like, that's not my biggest accomplishment. Like I said, my biggest accomplishment is the fact that I've had 7 guys decide to join the armed forces. And what that tells me is that they've learned, not completely from me, but they've learned how to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Like I told you, my number one job is to recruit for the Army. So I'm telling my recruiters, stop going to these administrators, stop going to the principals. Now, if you can't get through to them, go to the coaches. Coaches are used to dealing with crazy parents. And most coaches, Mike, they believe in being a part of something bigger yourself. If you're playing a team sport, why do we get involved in the first place? And the Army is the greatest locker room I've ever been in my life. I left in 2004, and now that I'm rejoined as a civilian aide in 2019, it's like every day I got to put that uniform on. I'm like, dude, I am on the greatest team in the world. Like, we're 10-0-1 in the World Wars. We are, our guys are still the most lethal, mobile, hostile. Like, we're still the cat's pajamas. And, why we're that is because everything's team. And, to go back to your question, I mean, we're at a crossroads, man, because we're individualizing a team sport. I mean, there's going to be 2,000 kids in the transfer portal, and there's going to be, you see all these all these mixtapes, and the high school coach's job is harder than it's ever been. I mean, it's hard, right? And nobody's doing this, for the money, unless you've been over at Richmond Heights for 30 years. Like, nobody's doing this. Nobody's getting rich off this, and you've got to develop your own podcast to do that. So, yeah, right. So put them in a team environment, and talk about that. Talk about the best. What are the best qualities a teammate has? Get them talking about other folks. I mean, that's something I did all the time. Like, hey, if you could tweet something, that's fine. Tweet about your teammate. If you're gonna get interviewed, that's fine. Talk about your teammate. It sounds really simple, but it's kind of got our style a little bit, right? And I firmly believe in, like, you can't have trust without the truth. And listen, there's going to be some things I'm telling you that you're not going to like to hear. I don't know. Well, we had a kid at Cornerstone who was averaging 27 points a game last year, and I think he's transferring. I don't think it's all on me or whatever, but it just gets to a point where, like, okay, I mean, you got to want to be a part of something bigger than yourself, right? And what you do is a lot more important than what you say, right? I can tell my wife I love her, or I can do the dishes and do the laundry and do the things that she wants me to do, and that's a lot more, right? And I think just so many kids, they think like being a leader is just barking at somebody. Well, no, like the oldest form of leadership is leading by example. And when you always set the example, then that gets you into the next level, right? Where you can actually be concerned with somebody besides yourself. You got to learn, to love somebody else. And it sucks because in team sports we're losing that. And I think it shows, right? Like, you watch great basketball and it's still, the ball moves, and you watch bad basketball and it doesn't matter the level, right, Mike? It's so true. It's just hard to watch, right? And you don't have to be a junkie like us, you just be a casual fan, and just get outside, learn to become a part of something. It's not about you. Like, that's the essence of leadership. It isn't about you. Like, it's not about how many points you score. It's not even about your scholarship, right? It's like, I'm so sick of reading, so blessed. Like, you're talking about these 90 offers. You can only take one of them, right? Like, what happened to trying to be the best team you can be and letting the rest take care of itself? And it always does. It's the information age. If you can play, they're going to find you. So that would be the first thing I would suggest is for all your listeners, is maybe start by practicing. Hey, what are we grateful for today? I mean, you'd be amazed on what their mindset would do. And the other thing that I suggest that we always did at St. Joe's, and I'll continue to do here, is we have a mentor program. So every upperclassman is assigned an underclassman. And the theory behind that is, okay, you're going to learn how to take care of somebody besides yourself. And that's from the Army model, is you become a team leader, then a squad leader, then maybe a platoon sergeant, then then a first sergeant, sergeant major. It's the same concept, and you're going to get more and more people under you. And it might be something that's like, okay, this teacher has this idiosyncrasies. Maybe this girl's real mouthy, or hey, Coach Quaz doesn't let you say yes or no, and they're just going to learn again to take care of something besides themselves. Everything we do in society now is me, I. And it's a challenge for coaches, because we're in a team sport and everybody's trying to individualize it. So I think the more you can do as team, and listen, if it was easy, everybody would do it, man, right? Because as soon as you start this stuff, kids just leave. They don't because there are coaches that are going to let you do whatever you want, and they're going to make you promises because you got to catch a fish before you clean it, and they're going to do whatever they want. And it's happening at the college level, right? Like, listen, recruiting has changed, man. Even in the last 5 years. college coaches are going to recruit transfers first because they're looking to feed their families. So they got to win. Like, winners win is how they feed their families. Like, I tell kids, I don't care if we don't win another game. Like, it's not going to change. It's not going to change what I think of myself, or that's not why I'm here. I'm here to develop you, take you as a boy, and turn you into a man. And so anyway, they're going to recruit college transfers first, JUCO kids second, and prep school kids third. High school kids, you look in the area, like how many Division I scholarships were there, Mike? Weren't many.
There weren't a lot. Yeah, this year there were not a lot, that's for sure.
The
extra NCAA year of eligibility, which we've talked with a couple different coaches about that and the impact that is having and is going to continue to have. And then, as you said, it's like if you're a college coach, why not recruit a transfer who's already proven themselves at the college level versus a kid who, yeah, you can scout them all you want, but there's no guarantee with any high school kid that they're going to turn into a good college player. And if you can already see the results out on a college floor, why wouldn't you recruit a transfer first? It just makes sense. As you said, if you're trying to feed your family, makes sense to me.
Look, the best player in the ACC this year was a grad transfer from Stanford, brother. For Louisville. Think about that. That was the best player in the ACC this year.
It's crazy.
Right? So what happens is if you can play in D2 or at a mid-major or low major, you're going to be going somewhere else. And I look back in 2015, I had Carlton Bragg and Derek Pardon and Brian Parker, and Brian Parker went to Marist, and then a bunch of people wanted to take him afterwards. I think we're going to look in 10, 15 years, and the most amazing thing we did was keep all those kids together. Right? That might be the last of the Mohicans. I think we were as high as 5th in the country. We're playing Oak Hill on ESPN, and we're up 14 in the fourth quarter. Now, apparently we had very poor coaching, and they got us at the end. We probably would have been number 1 in the country, but I tell those kids all the time, they were over here Monday night for the national championship game. I said, guys, and 15 years, the most, and that was 6 years ago. I said, we're going to be sitting, at a bar someplace, and the most amazing thing we did was keep all you guys together, because that's not going to happen anymore with prep schools. And Mike, show me the stats. How many kids that transfer in high schools don't transfer in college? There ain't many of them, brother. And if they transfer twice, and if they transfer twice in high school, I bet you there's less than 5%, maybe even more. It's more minuscule that are going to transfer in college. The culture of this has changed. And listen, man, these guys can't say it, but I will. And I have a lot of friends, that are doing this for a living. And they will tell you it has never been as bad as it is right now, meaning the college coaching profession. It's awful. Because again, if you want to feed your family, you maybe have to make these sacrifices. Whereas the high school coach, unlike when you and I were kind of coming up, a lot of these, we're always teachers. Now, a lot of times they don't want teachers. So, can you imagine? I can't imagine feeding my kids based on the decision of some of my 17 and 18-year-old kids that I coached.
For sure. Yep.
Carlton Bragg couldn't decide if he wanted to eat Captain Crunch or Rice Krispies. So you're telling me my whole life's going to be undecided on what college he decides to go to? That's nuts.
It is crazy. I think we talked about it before when you were on the last time, just about the challenges of being a high school basketball coach in 2018. And I think that trend is only accelerated now that we're in 2021. And when you think about a college coach, and I don't care what level you are, I guess Division III, there's some insulation because you can't work with your players during the off season. So there's at least that piece of it. But when you look at the Division I level compared to when you and I were playing and the amount of time that those coaches can, and because they can, they have to spend with their players in the offseason with individual workouts and all the different things that they have to do, it just becomes, it's a 24/7, 365-day a year, grind it out to make a living. And we're talking about, it's not just the head coaches. We're talking about assistants who are making next to nothing. It's a challenging profession. We've talked to head Division I coaches on the podcast, and we've talked to guys who are just starting out that are basically unpaid assistant coaches at small level schools. And it doesn't matter if you're making big money or you're making no money. The demands of the job in terms of your time are very, very similar. You may be doing slightly different tasks, but it's just to be a basketball coach. And again, I don't care what level you are, it is challenging. And I think it speaks to the power of the game that we all keep coming back to it because we love it. And whether that's right or wrong, it's true. I know it's true that we just keep coming back. We're drawn to it because it's such a special game, and we know what it's done for us. And I just look at the coaching profession, and anytime I see a coach that has any interaction with any of my kids, I'm just so thankful that they're willing to put in the time to help my kids to get better. And that's really what it's all about. I don't care if it's a 7th grade coach, a 4th grade coach, an AAU coach, a high school coach. Those people are putting in their time to try to help my kid be better if they're doing it right. And, you talked about it, that, look, it's fun to win. Don't get me wrong. You're as competitive as anybody I know, and I love to win too. But ultimately, as you said, it's the relationships that you remember and that ultimately are important. And I think that it's sometimes easy to get lost in the day-to-day of the minutia. We got to win the next game. We got to prepare. I got to watch more film. What can we do differently? And when you really zoom out and you look at the big picture of the totality of your coaching career, your playing career, it's not those individual wins and losses that really matters. It's the people that you got connected to and the people that you were able to impact. And I just think that when you talk about coaching, to me, that's really what it's all about.
There's no doubt. And, I mean, you agree with me, right, that it's as hard as it's ever been, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You guys talked to a ton of coaches. I mean, I was on a Zoom last night with Coach Beeline, and he was talking to a bunch of veterans, and it was awesome. He was so transparent. He's just a huge patriot. And, I mean, think about it. Look at his situation, right, with the Cavs. So he's making making millions and millions and millions, right? And he couldn't deal with it, right? And hopefully, he was a history teacher, and hopefully he gets back into it because he's such a gem and he's such a great teacher of the game. But yeah, it's the whole thing is just evolving, right? And I just if there's one thing I would want the listeners just to take is listen, I went down that pigeonhole, Mike, and I did. I rated my success on what the scoreboard says, and to the point where. And again, it was a culmination of everything, and I've seen it with so many guys. And when you get to the next level, you see guys that are trying to be somebody that they're not. They're trying to act like Bobby Huggins or Mike Krzyzewski, or listen, you got to be yourself because there's only one person you can be. I think I told that story on your first podcast, and I'll never forget being at Duke camp, and I was on the outdoor camps, my outdoor courts, my first year at camp, and Coach K comes out, and I was a second lieutenant maybe in the Army. This is 2002, 2003. And he comes and he tells me, he said, "Hey, listen," he said, "Kwaz," he goes, "a lot of people are going to be turned off by your energy because they're going to think it's fake." He's like, "But you control that. Don't ever let it, and I remember that. He said, "You can always control how much energy you bring." And a lot of people they're not going to like that. And I think for so much part of my career, Mike, I cared about, not that but you put too much value into what other people think, right? And then you just get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, you just got to realize that you're not going to be for everybody, right? And you need to do what you think is right, and understand that you're not trying to screw kids. You're not, no matter what a parent says, or you're not trying to. And listen, at VASJ, I had the greatest parents. The parents had nothing to do with me getting ousted. You hear so many of those stories. Right. That was 100% the administration. They didn't like me. My parents were, as a matter of fact, I think they were the other way. I think they were more disheartened than anybody when I left. But again, I think you need to kind of step back and say, what's important. As a father, and you don't get this time back. My players constantly come back and they say, "Coach, you've changed." Well, you're darn right I've changed. I say, number one, you got to understand, I was right out of the Army when I had you guys, and I'm older. Number two, you can't, not that it wasn't, not that I swore at kids or I acted like an idiot, but you can't do that anymore. You just can't, right? We all have stories. Right. Dino Gaudio is one of the biggest influences in my life. If we went back and watched tape on the things he said to me, it wouldn't hold up in court. He might still get arrested. Okay. And then number 3, and probably the most important is, and I told those guys, I mean, I would study with you. I would work out with you. I would do everything with you. And every minute I spent with you was time I spent away from my own kids. And my own kids deserve that time. They're my number one priority. And, you know, your decisions illustrate your priorities. And I'm at a point in my life now where my kids and my family need to be number one. And that's something you can never forget.
No doubt. All right, I want to wrap up with one final question. It's a 2-parter. Tell me, as you look forward over the next year, what is your biggest challenge that you see ahead? Could be basketball, could be life, could be anything. And then number 2, what's the biggest joy that you've gotten to this point out of being the head coach at Cornerstone Christian? So biggest challenge, biggest joy.
I think the biggest challenge is just what every coach faces. You know, if kids just, you know, like understanding that if you're a certain way, it's going to repel some people. It's going to repel more people than that it used to attract. Again, the number one thing I hear about myself, Mike, is that I have too much discipline. I'm not so sure I want to change that, brother. I'm really not. You know, soldiers don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. I think kids are the same way. So they're always going to know that I love them. They're always going to, you know, I'm going to build a real relationship, but that's a challenge. Like, it's just kids understanding that I'm not correcting you as a person. I'm correcting the behavior, right? And I think the great advantage I'm going to have in overcoming that obstacle is the fact that I got my 2 sons, and I can promise you I'm not going to coach anybody as hard as I'm going to coach them. And you know, I coached my 8th grader this year who's really, really good. Kick him out of practice probably once a week. And so, you know, he's getting used to it. And just, I don't know, the biggest joy so far, you know, has been that. You know, I know Coach Drew's joy, because you use the word, is Jesus, others, and yourself. And just being in an environment where, again, like, I never would have left St. Joe's on my own, ever. You know, I had opportunities to leave, and I didn't. And I had college opportunities to leave, and I didn't. And I never would have left on my own. I took the job there because I wanted my kids to come there, and I wanted them to play for me there. So just my biggest joy is just having them in an environment where, you know, Jesus is first, then others are second, and, you know, you're last. And, you know, you put kids in an environment like that. I just feel so blessed to be around, you know, those type of people. Not that there weren't great people at St. Joe's, because they're some of my nearest and dearest friends, and those relationships will never be changed. But it's, you know, it's sometimes, man, again, through all your pain is God's purpose. And, you know, I just feel so blessed to just to have this opportunity, right? And that'd be my last thing to all your coaches out there. Just understand when something else happens, and listen, I didn't want to hear it either, man. One door closed, another one open. I didn't want to hear it, Mike. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to. People who love me most, I didn't want to hear it, but it's absolutely true. Like, and sometimes you got to say, you know what? Through these tribulations, man, that's where the awesomeness is. And I just made up my own word. That's where the awesomeness is going to occur.
I do that all the time. Ask Jason. I do that all the time. Make up words.
That's what's going to occur. You know, and I know the toughest things I've ever done in my life, going through West Point, you know, making it through being suicidal, you know, making it through my wife being sick. Those have reaped the greatest benefits. That makes you just realize, stop and say, man, you know what? I got it pretty good. Like, this is pretty incredible. And everything I need is right here. And listen, you're talking about a guy who constantly battles the shame of not being good enough. Like I told you listeners, dude, I still have suicidal thoughts. Yes, I do. But I also know, I know why I'm here, and my purpose is much bigger than any of those demons that I used to face. And so for anybody that's listening, that, you know, I know if it's just one, Mike and Jason, it's worth it. So I hope somebody's listening to me today and just realizes, dude, just keep going, man. Just keep going, because, and I'm sorry I get emotional, but like, I mean, it's hard to be any lower than I was, brother. People talk about the rock. I was below the rock. I was buried. I was beneath the dirt, man. And I'm here now. And I'm here now talking to you guys. And if you can just get through it, and you just realize, man, the only way I lose is if I give up. And that's not saying you shouldn't change your situation or you shouldn't transfer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you just keep giving your best effort at everything you do, it's impossible to fail. And when you go at it with that mindset, life is pretty good.
Absolutely. Before we get out, I want to give you a chance to share how people can reach out to you, social media, email, website, whatever you want to share. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, I'm very active on social media, Mike, as you know. Man, I still love the hoop heads. Where I still got my picture on there, so don't ever put Alan Stein's background. That will
your picture is
me.
staying. Yeah, your picture is staying. If you've ever checked out the website or our Twitter, that's Kwaz and I on the front cover of most of our social media pages. So for sure.
Yes. So I'm at Babe Kwaz on Twitter and Instagram. I'm extremely active. Listen, this happens to me all the time. So I do want to do this. If anybody is struggling out there, I'm not a doctor, but I've been through it, and this is something I do for the Secretary of the Army and for veterans, and this is something I do more than you think. So if anybody is struggling out there and they just want to talk to somebody who's been through it, my email is babequaz, Bravo Alpha Bravo Echo Kilo Whiskey Alpha Sierra @yahoo.com. And if there's anybody listening to me and he just says, you know what, man, this guy gets it, and they want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to get back to him, Mike. And
Kwaz,
Jason, so thank you so much.
Man, we cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story, which is obviously intensely personal and something that clearly you have passion might not be the right word, but clearly you have a desire to help people who have been in a similar situation to you. And I think anybody who listens to the podcast can truly understand that the type of person that you are, the type of coach that you've been and that you're going to continue to be. And for you taking the time out of your schedule to jump back on as guest number 2, as we said off the top, and now guest number, I don't know where we are, but I think this will probably end up being like episode 459, maybe, or 460, somewhere in there. It's crazy. But we cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to jump on. To everyone out there, hopefully you were entertained, educated, and just enjoyed this episode. Hearing Kwaz kind of pour his heart out to our audience really means a lot to me. So to everyone out there, thanks for listening. To Kwaz, thanks for jumping out with us, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.